The first panel session is to look at current and emerging challenges in the Indo-Pacific. Now, so far this morning, we've had an Australian and a Western Australian view, and now I'd like to try and elicit a North Asia, a Southeast Asia, and a South Asia view. So our three panellists, and I'll give the abridged versions, Professor So Young Lee from Korea, former Major General in the Korean Army, now Professor at the National Defense University and the National Security College with an interest in Korean-US relationships. Dr. Lin Kuok, who's a fellow at the International Institute of Strategic Studies in Singapore, but has previously been a distinguished fellow variously at Brookings and at the Kennedy School at Harvard University, and in his spare time has managed to become an advocate and solicitor before the Supreme Court of Singapore, and in his spare time produces TV news, and is well known for her contributions in international relations area. Finally, from India, we have Robin Darwin, former Chief of the Naval Services, a 42-year distinguished career in the Indian Navy with various senior commands on the Eastern and Western Naval Commands, and finished his career as Chief of Naval Services. Now chairs the National Maritime Foundation of India, which is the major maritime think tank in National Maritime Foundation, which is the major national think tank in India. So firstly, Major General Lee, if I could turn to you. As I said, we've heard a Western Australian and Australian view. How do you see things from Korea, looking into the Indo-Pacific, and what do you see the challenges and the opportunities in the Indo-Pacific from your perspective?
All right, thank you. Thank you for kind introduction. Good morning, everyone, and great to see you all. Thank you for hosting this wonderful conference and inviting me here in historic and the beautiful city, Perth. This is my first trip to Australia, but looks like not first time, because I can frequently eat Australian beef and Australian wine in restaurant Seoul, so looks like home. Also, I have some friends here among 200,000 Korean people who live here in Australia. Today's subject is Indo-Pacific strategy. So I'd like to talk about the regional countries' viewpoint and the Korean perspective Indo-Pacific strategy. Let me start from Korea and Australia relations. Korea and Australia relation is very close in terms of economy and defense. Before coming here, I had an office call with the Australian ambassador to Seoul. Ambassador James Che told me our two nations' trade volume is more than $30 billion in a year. Also, we have good defense relations. We have 2+2 meeting. Foreign minister and defense minister of both countries meet every other year. Korea and Australia have a combined exercise with the regional countries, Army, Air Force, Navy. Also, we have some defense industrial cooperation. 2 weeks ago, Australian Navy Vice Admiral Mayer was assigned to the United Nations Command Deputy Commander. I had a good conversation with him before I come here. More importantly, 17,000 Australian soldiers fought during the Korean War. Among them, 340 were killed in action. We Korean people salute those brave heroes. At this time, let me mention about Korea and the United States relations. As you know, Korea and the US are strong ally. We have a combined defense system. 28,500 US military service men and women are stationed in Korea. Nowadays, Korea and the United States are trying to denuclearize North Korea. with the international community. At this point, let me talk about the Korea and the China relations. Korea's #1 trading partner is China. Also, we need China's cooperation for denuclearization of North Korea and the security of Korean Peninsula. But as you know, China is pushing ahead One Belt, One Road initiative very strongly. Here is some confliction point. I will give you one example. A couple of years ago, United States deployed anti-air missile, a THAAD system in South Korea against North Korean nuclear and missile threat. But at the time, China did massive economic retaliation to Korea business cooperation in China. It is still ongoing. I think it's not the fair game. Also, it's not the free market economy. That's one of the issue, I think. Let me talk about Korea's perspective on the Indo-Pacific strategy. 2 years ago, when President Trump first visit to Korea, at the time, Korea's standpoint on the Indo-Pacific strategy was not clearly confirmed. But last June, President Trump visit again to Korea. At the time, the President Moon said at the joint press conference, Korea and United States will seek for the harmonized cooperation point between Korea's new Southern policy and Indo-Pacific strategy. I think it's a big improvement and a positive improvement. Also, at the time, the United States Department of State said Korea and the U.S. strong alliance is the linchpin of the Indo-Pacific strategy. 3 days ago, Mark Esper, new Defense Secretary of the United States, visited Korea. He met the key leaders of Korea, and he said the same message in Korea. Let me conclude with some of the future development of the Indo-Pacific. I think, first, Korea should participate actively, more actively, for Indo-Pacific strategy, because Indo-Pacific strategy includes rules-based economy, rules-based international order, and free market economy, liberal democracy, as well as respect of human rights. All these are very important values for not only Korea, I think for your country too. Second point is, as previous speakers mentioned, freedom of navigation and freedom of overflight should be maintained in Indo-Pacific area. Korea's case, 90% of Korea's oil import and 100% of Korea's gas import, majority of Korea's trading pass through Indo-Pacific area. So it is vital national interest of Korea, freedom of navigation and freedom of overflight. Third point is as the middle power country, Korea is the 12th largest economy in the world. Korea should have more cooperation and connectivity with the regional countries. For instance, United States, Australia, Japan, India, as well as Asian countries. This is my view. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. Thanks very much, Major General. Now, Lynn, for a Singapore and a Southeast Asia view.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure whether what I'm saying necessarily represents all of Southeast Asia, but let me just give you one view, mainly my own. I think the security situation in this part of the world, unfortunately, as I see it, is deteriorating quite rapidly. We've seen North Korea restart its missile testing. That's problematic, but not unduly worrying considering the huge consequences. I think that parties will continue to keep the situation within control. I think the recent missile tests are, North Korea's ever more persistent mating cry to the United States to come to the table to speak to it. We've also seen, unfortunately, China's rhetoric on Taiwan harden. It released its defense paper recently, which was quite notable in terms of how strongly it put its position vis-a-vis Taiwan. And of course, we've seen events in Hong Kong as well very quickly deteriorate. And the situation is very worrying because it's not really clear how the situation will end. And of course, the issue that most greatly concerns my part of the world, being at the forefront of the South China Sea, has been the increased presence of Chinese vessels in the South China Sea. And I think that, in a sense, is the most volatile part of my part of the world right now. And let me briefly talk about this deteriorating situation in the South China Sea. I think all of us know how China has aggressively pursued its territorial claims in the South China Sea. It began its massive island reclamation activities at the end of 2013. By the end of 2017, these became largely operational naval and air bases. 2018, just last year, saw China militarize these features. It deployed anti-ship and anti-aircraft missiles, as well as electronic jammers in the Spratlys in April. In May, it landed long-range bombers in the Paracels just off Vietnam. And also in the Paracels, it later outfitted a feature called Bombay Reef with radar capabilities and the ability to intercept communications. Now, China does not actually strengthen any of its legal claims by these activities, but what it has done is that it has increased its control of them. It claims that as sovereign over these features, it's entitled to do as it wishes over these features, but unfortunately, sovereignty over these features are hotly contested, and at least in the case of one of them, has been found to be, by an international tribunal, to be a low tide elevation within the Philippines exclusive economic zone, and therefore within Philippine sovereignty. But quite apart from China's actions in terms of consolidating its control over features in the South China Sea, what it's also done is sought to to strengthen its maritime claims and control in the waters of the South China Sea. And this has taken several worrying forms. First, China has sought to encroach on the coastal states' exclusive economic zones and to impede on them developing their economic rights within the exclusive economic zone. We've seen in the past month how it has sent a survey vessel to survey for oil and gas in Vietnam's exclusive economic zone. Vietnam has registered fierce protests, and this is a situation that's ripe for conflict should the situation escalate. Second, China has also increased its presence around features by using naval vessels, Coast Guard, as well as maritime militia around features, including around Malaysian-occupied features, Malaysian-occupied feature Laconia Shoal, which it has done since 2013. But recently, about 300 vessels have been swarming a feature that has been occupied by the Philippines, T2 Island. It's also sent. Well, there was also an incident around Reed Bank near the Philippines where a Chinese fishing vessel collided into a Philippines fishing vessel, supposedly by accident, except for the Philippines vessel was stationary, and it was a wide expanse of sea, so it was quite unusual that there should be such a collision if it were not deliberate. And finally, China has been, with ever more persistence, seeking to deny the United States and its allies navigational and other freedoms of the sea. And I think this has also seen worrying developments, because in September last year, we saw that for the very first time, previously agreed upon rules of behavior for air and behavior at air, safety at sea and air, that had been agreed upon between the United States and China in November 2014. This was the first time when China actually ignored these rules of behavior at sea, and there was a near miss in the South China Sea when a Chinese vessel came dangerously close to a US vessel, the USS Decatur, which had to swerve to avoid a collision. Now, China's aggressive militarization of the South China Sea is often dismissed as inconsequential during outright conflict, and naval experts say that these installations can be easily destroyed by the United States, ships, subs, and aircraft. However, I don't think we should be discounting the clear advantage that China has gained in situations short of outright conflict. And I think all of us can agree that neither the United States nor China, nor any of us want conflict. And so situations short of outright conflict are really most of the time. So China has gained a huge advantage most of the time. And what China has gained is it has achieved strategic depth and reach to defend against adversaries. It's also enabled itself to protect access to the Malacca Strait, as well as facilitate deployment of its embryonic submarine-based second strike nuclear capability. It's also gained non-military advantages, which we should not forget. It's deterred other claimants from putting up strong resistance. We should compare how Vietnam has responded to the recent incursions compared to how it responded in 1974, when it put up a great fight in the Paracels. And also the Philippines, as I think most of you would have read about, has basically rolled over in the South China Sea, which has been unfortunate because the Philippines has the law on its side. It's also greatly undermined US credibility in the region. I think while Washington was asleep at the wheel, we saw China build these huge fortresses in the sea, and Washington did little to stop it. And so I think this is a potent reminder to the region that, while the United States is there because of a strategic calculation, China is very much a geographical fact in the region, and the countries in the region need to deal with that. And how it chooses to deal with China is increasingly less and less assertive, which I think is problematic for a rules-based order. We can agree that a rules-based order matters to all of us. So in conclusion, I would just say that while the Chinese government has insisted that the situation in the South China Sea and in the border region is stable and peaceful, and its external powers are in fact stirring up trouble in the region, I think the truth of the matter is really that the smaller countries in the region are increasingly trying to adjust themselves to a new normal in the South China Sea, and whether this is good for the long-term stability of the region, I would suggest no. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Lynn. Robin, for a view from India and South Asia. Admiral Dewan.
Thank you, Honourable Stephen Smith, General Lee, Dr. Lin, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Over the next few minutes, I will provide an overview of the challenges and opportunities in the Indo-Pacific region. The Indo-Pacific, which is essentially a confluence of two oceans, has emerged as the world's economic and strategic center of gravity in the maritime domain. The Indian Ocean is the third largest water body, spanning an area of 68.5 million square kilometers, and the countries on the rim of the Indian Ocean are home to nearly 1/3 of humanity. When we add the 35 countries of the Asia-Pacific region, then the entire Indo-Pacific region is home to nearly 60% of the world's population. India sits astride busy sea lines of communication which transit across the Indian Ocean over which nearly 120,000 ships transit every year, carrying 66% of the world's oil, 50% of the world's container traffic, and 33% of the world's cargo traffic. Approximately 1 billion tons of oil transits through the Indian Ocean every year, and these oil arteries and trade routes lead further east to the ASEAN and countries like South Korea, Japan, and China. But the seas are no longer a benign medium, and globalization has resulted in vulnerability of the oceans. Who could have imagined that in the 21st century, we would once again be grappling with pirates, or that the major threat in the maritime domain would be from asymmetric challenges and maritime terrorism? But that is a reality, and the other challenges include arms trafficking, drug smuggling, human trafficking, and poaching. Another challenge on the waters of the Indo-Pacific is that indiscriminate pollution of the seas has resulted in a detrimental impact of climate change on the oceans. Consequently, a large percentage of extreme climate conditions turn into natural disasters, and our navies and coast guards have to be ready to provide humanitarian assistance and disaster relief. The instabilities and turbulence in some parts of the Indo-Pacific have a potential to spill over into the maritime domain, and the situation can best be described as fragile. Consequently, over 120 warships from over 20 navies are always present in the Indian Ocean to safeguard their maritime interests. India and Australia have advocated adherence to international law, maintenance and promotion of peace and stability, maritime safety and security, freedom of navigation, and overflight in the region. The Indo-Pacific is essentially a contiguous maritime space, and there is a need to examine the existing structures to promote maritime cooperation. In the Indian Ocean, at the conceptual level, we have the concept of Sagar, which means the ocean, and the acronym stands for Security and Growth for All in the Region, and is a vision of the Honorable Prime Minister of India. At the political level, we have the Indian Ocean Rim Association, and at the execution level of the navies, we have the Indian Ocean Naval Symposium, which is a unique initiative taken by the Indian Navy in 2008 to promote maritime cooperation. Similarly, in the Asia-Pacific, at the conceptual level, we could consider the ASEAN Regional Forum, at the political level, the East Asia Summit, and at the execution level of the navies, we have the Western Pacific Naval Symposium. There is a need for greater interaction between the existing structures to provide synergy for maritime cooperation. The waters of the Indo-Pacific are also global economic highways, and the maritime interests of the countries of the region are intrinsically linked to unfettered flow of oil and trade across the entire region. Another unique feature of the Indian Ocean is that 80% of the oil and trade that emanates in the Indian Ocean is extra-regional in nature. This implies that if there is any impediment to the free flow of oil or trade, it will have a detrimental impact not just on the economies of the region, but the global economy as well. Safety, security, and stability on the waters of the Indo-Pacific is therefore of paramount importance. Networking between the Indian Navy, Royal Australian Navy, and other navies in the region, and maritime partnerships between countries of the region, therefore, needs to be strengthened in the coming years. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much, Robin. If I just quickly recap and come back round this way. You, Robin, have, in your contribution, made the point that the Indo-Pacific is consolidated as a strategic notion, and this means we have to focus on the importance of the maritime and land-based strength of the Indian Ocean and the Indian Ocean Rim. Len, you've reminded us that even though we don't talk so much about South China Sea these days, of the law as it relates to the South China Sea and the strategic advantage that has given to China. And Major General Lee, South Korea was one of the last cabs off the rank, so to speak, in accepting the notion of the Indo-Pacific, but I'm very pleased to see that you've now embraced that, as you have with your essentially look south strategy from Korea. But you've also made the point that, like so many nations, South Korea has China, as does Australia, as its most significant trading partner. And it's that context I'd like to start a bit of a panel discussion. If we were having this discussion 12 months ago, we'd be talking about South China Sea, US policy uncertainty, and the worry about Chinese assertiveness. Now we're worried about the relationship between the United States and China moving from strategic competition to what I describe a Cold War, very importantly, small c, small w, Cold War with economic characteristics, because unlike the US and the Soviet Union, there's an inextricably interwoven economic characteristics as well. So going back across the same order, Major General Lee, how do you see the deepening of the strategic competition between US and China impacting upon those challenges in the Indo-Pacific?
All right. Thank you. As I mentioned earlier, Indo-Pacific strategy is the rules-based international order. We should maintain rules-based international order. So I think the United States want to keep current rules-based international order, and China would like to expand China's political, economy, military influence and power to the region. So there is some confliction. Korea is the United States allied country. We have only one allied country, that is the United States. We have the former ambassador to Korea from the United States, Ambassador Mark Lippert. He did a great job in Seoul. I think Korea should maintain strong stance with the alliance with the United States. But at the same time, Korea, as I said to you earlier, have some relationship with China in terms of economy and security, also the North Korea denuclearization. So Korea also maintain the strategic cooperative partnership with China. So based upon our alliance, and then we also should keep the good relationship with China. That's my view.
Thank you. Lynn?
The question of deepening of strategic competition and how it's impacting challenges on the Indo-Pacific. So it's clearly the strategic competition between the United States and China is clearly decreasing the strategic space that countries in my part of the world have to operate. The United States, and to a lesser extent China, repeatedly asserts that it's not asking countries in the region to choose between itself and China. However, with what we're seeing happening in the economic sphere, the United States seeking to decouple itself from the Chinese economy or the Chinese technological realm with Huawei, etc., I think this will ultimately have implications for the extent to which countries can really say that can actually avoid taking sides, because ultimately you're going to have to go with one economy or one internet 5G provider or other, and I think it's going to be very difficult for Southeast Asian countries to stand by the side and not take sides. That said, I think they do need to resist that to the extent possible. And I think one way that they can do it is to increasingly focus on a rules-based, or propping up a rules-based order and standing with principle as opposed to necessarily supporting allies and partners blindly. And I think what this will sometimes mean is that it might offend. For most of the countries, it's the United States as the strongest ally. It might occasionally offend the United States. I don't think the United States has come to the trade war with clean hands. I mean, it's undermining the rules-based economic system, and that's a problem. So, but I think ensuring that it stands by principles and the rule of law is the only way that that countries in the region can actually seek to keep its head above water, unfortunately. And insofar as China objects to countries abiding by the rules-based international order, I would say that China itself claims to support international law and a rules-based international order. If we go through all of its speeches, that's what it claims. And so it should be a little less disturbed when countries in the region support the rules-based international order and international law than it has shown itself to be in the past. So I think I'll just stop there at this moment.
Thanks, Lynn. So, Robin, both General Lee and Lynn have made the point that the rubber hits the road on strategic competition or trade war between US and China, depending upon the interweaving of your economy with China. But it also, the point Lynn's made a couple of times, the rubber hits the road on proximity. So for small countries in Southeast Asia, ASEAN countries in Southeast Asia with close proximity to China, where the Chinese economy dwarfs those economies, this really crystallises one's focus on how one conducts itself. In India's case, the only reason we talk about the Indo-Pacific, not the Asia-Pacific, is because of the rise of India. So India, a country also of over 1 billion people with a better age demographic than China, all the projections are by 2050, India will be the second or the third largest economy in the world with a population the size of China, and you have a land border with China. So with that long-term India as a great power horizon, how do you see the current deepening of US-China difficulties in an Indian context?
In my view, this competition, which is talked about between the United States and China, has to be converted into something of a cooperation and collaboration in the larger Indo-Pacific region. And when we talk, as I said, about the Indo-Pacific region, we have to consider the Indian Ocean region and the Asia-Pacific region. And as was described by our Honorable Prime Minister Modi, the extent or the bounds actually extend from the shores of Africa to the shores of America. And some of the issues that need to be taken into account for this is that firstly, we need to look at a rules-based international order in the region. And again, quoting from what Prime Minister Modi had said at the Shangri-La Dialogue in June 2018, is that India believes that there is a need for a rules-based international order in which all countries are considered as equals, and we believe in sovereignty, territorial integrity, and in equality of all nations. And he also said that to achieve this, India will engage the world in peace, with respect, and with total commitment to international law. So that is one aspect. The other aspect is that we need to look at the connectivity options. And while we have the connectivity options of the Belt and Road Initiative, which is being pursued by China, I would like to offer an alternate bouquet of options. We could have the International North-South Transport Corridor being considered, the Asia-Africa Growth Corridor, the Project MOSM, which is an initiative of India for connectivity between the cultures and the peoples, the free and open Indo-Pacific, and the concept of Sagar, which, as I mentioned, is security and growth for all in the region. The other aspect is that we need to have a very dynamic and vibrant entire maritime domain awareness, where we exchange white shipping information, because security of the sea lines of communication is important. India has signed the technical agreement for information exchange with both the United States as well as Australia and approximately 36 other countries. And we have set up the Information Management and Analysis Center in 2014, and also the Fusion Center, which will help us have a vibrant and a dynamic maritime domain awareness. The other issue, which is very important that we need to look at, is that we need to actually progress not just the military to military cooperation. And I think that in this regard, the Quad itself should be seen as an anchor and as a cooperation construct, rather than a construct which is intended to hold on or intended against any particular nation. And if we look at it as the cooperation mechanism, then it's not just the military cooperation, but the entire cooperation across the maritime spectrum, whether it's in shipping, whether it's in development of ports and harbors, whether it's climate change, whether it's anti-pollution measures, or humanitarian assistance and disaster relief. It is the entire spectrum of maritime cooperation, and we need to draw a comprehensive maritime cooperation roadmap between the countries of the region, including, of course, the United States of America and China, because as has been conveyed, it should be considered that the Indo-Pacific region is inclusive, with centrality of the ASEAN countries, with China included, and then only we can have a cooperation and a collaboration mechanism and an environment within the entire region.
Well, thanks very much. There's plenty of people in the room who've been arguing for a long time that Australia and India's relationship should be enhanced, in particular on the maritime front. So anyone here from HMAS Stirling, the Australian Navy, the Australian Defence Organisation, or Linda Reynolds' officers, please take detailed notes with a one-on-one with Robin. There's so much more we could do. We haven't touched upon what implications, if any, Kashmir has for the region. We haven't expanded upon the worries that we have about what's occurring in Hong Kong. But we certainly set the scene for the rest of the day with some very clear views about how North Asia, Southeast Asia and South Asia view these issues as distinct from an Australian or a Western Australian view. We've gone 1 minute over the expanded time I was given, so you'll have to cut short your morning tea. Ladies and gentlemen, please thank our three panellists.